Hi, my name's Ashleigh, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at two different texts, dramas to be specific, and analyzing them to see what we can learn about racial identity, specifically in the US. And the first text that I wanted to take a look at is A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. This one's a classic, so many are very familiar with this one, but basically it centers around an African American family living in Chicago in the 1950s. And it plays off of several themes, including race and also aspirations. The American dream is a really big theme in this play. And as such, each character, or each main character, has different dreams and different aspirations of how they hope to see the future play out. The protagonist, and arguably also the antagonist, is named Walter Lee, and he lives with his wife Ruth, their son Travis, as well as his sister Benitha and his widowed mother Lena, who also generally is referred to as Mama in the play. Walter's dream or aspiration is to invest money in a liquor store and to create a future for his family and for himself that he never had growing up. His sister, Benitha, dreams of going to medical school and furthering her education. And their mother, Lena or Mama, dreams of buying a home, and more specifically of having a garden. The play is full of symbolism, which is really interesting. That's a literary device that Lorraine Hansberry uses a lot. There's a few different instances of phrases or items that become really symbolic. The first one pops up in the first act, and it is the phrase, "eat your eggs." In scene 1 of the play, Ruth, the wife of Walter's wife, is making him breakfast, and he wakes up in the morning and he feels stifled by his life, by poverty, by all kinds of sorts of oppression, and sort of associates that with this idea of being told to eat your eggs. He tells her that he has all these dreams and all these plans, and all that she seemingly will say to him is "eat your eggs." So there, Hansberry uses the symbolism of this phrase to kind of reference this idea of being stifled, of not feeling like you can achieve your dreams or feeling that you are oppressed. Another symbol, probably the most overt symbol in this play, is Mama's houseplant. There is a plant throughout the play that Mama is continually seen watering and taking care of. And in a sense, this is symbolic of her dream to have a home and have a garden. And it sort of comes to represent her perseverance in these dreams, that despite less than ideal circumstances, she continues to care for her hopes and her aspirations, as well as continuing to care for her children despite less than ideal circumstances. The last symbol that I wanted to mention was Benitha's hair. At the beginning of the play, Benitha is dating a man named George who has certain ideas about the ways in which African American individuals should assimilate to a white dominant culture. And as such, Benitha sort of takes on some of these ideas into her own identity. One being her hair. She has sort of she keeps her hair longer and tends to straighten it more to resemble more to a traditional European style of hair. However, about halfway through the play, she begins to become very close with one of her classmates named Ashleigh, who is very passionate about his African heritage, and as such, she too starts to grow in her passion for her own heritage. And a symbol of this, or to symbolize this, she cuts off her hair, or cuts her hair short, and begins to wear it in a more traditional African style. So in all three of these cases, Hansberry sort of uses these symbols. One is to represent this idea of oppression. Another is to represent this idea of dreams that seem to be unfulfilled. And the last is to represent this idea of female liberation and also embracing one's own heritage and identity. Additionally, Hansberry uses character development very masterfully. She creates a very interesting narrative based on the storyline and more specifically on these characters. One of the most interesting commentaries that I pulled from the text was the commentaries on racism and different approaches to racism that we see through the characters. So, near the end of the play, the family is considering buying a home in a wealthier, more traditionally white neighborhood, and one of their potential neighbors comes to their home to visit them and basically tells them that he feels they should not purchase this home and that they would be better off to purchase a home in a more traditionally African-American neighborhood. This man's name is Mr. Linder, and his way of thinking really represents the idea of segregationism, or the idea that races should be kept separate, that it's not proper or safe for the intermingling of racial groups. Next, we have George. I mentioned him a few minutes ago, but he is the man that Beneatha is originally dating at the beginning of the play. And he doesn't really take much pride in his African heritage. He tends to ignore the accomplishments of Black people and really just try to fit into the white-dominated society in which he lives. And so George, in this sense, sort of becomes representative of the idea of assimilationism, or rather to assimilate or change one's own culture to fit that of the dominant culture. And then lastly, we get Beneatha. She definitely goes through some character development. At the beginning, she might not feel exactly this way, but by the end of the play, she really adopts some anti-racist point of view, in large part thanks to Ashleigh and his own anti-racist philosophies. She embraces her African heritage. She wears traditional clothing from her that stems back to her heritage and chants traditional African songs, all of which sort of represent this idea of anti-racism, or rather the value of preserving each and every culture regardless of majority or minority status. So, sort of to recap that, Hansberry uses a lot of very well thought out literary devices and literary tools in her writing, including in large part symbolism and character development. The other play that I wanted to touch on in this video is For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide, When the Rainbow Is Enough. This is a long title, and people generally aren't as familiar with this play, but it is a really beautiful work. It is by Ntozake Shange, and similar to A Raisin in the Sun, this work also centers on a lot of ideas surrounding race, racism, feminism. This one is actually a choreo poem, which means it was written to be performed with sort of dance and poetry involved. And unlike A Raisin in the Sun, this play doesn't follow a very linear storyline. Shang tends to write in a much more idiosyncratic style and uses very unique punctuation and syntax, which lends a very unique feel to her work. The story itself, or the play itself, centers on 7 different women, all women of color and all living in the U.S. and each woman is sort of differentiated by the color of her clothing. And this play touches on a lot of really sensitive and really important themes, such as domestic abuse, isolation, oppression, racism, sexism. Some really big ideas in this play. Interestingly, though, while both of these plays have similar themes in many aspects, they approach them from completely different angles. A Raisin in the Sun uses this more traditional linear storytelling format where you're following the same characters, the same storyline throughout the whole play. Whereas For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough tends to jump back and forth between characters and different monologues, jump back and forth in timelines, which definitely sets them apart from each other. And it's definitely arguable that both of these different styles have their advantages and their disadvantages. A Raisin in the Sun was actually the first, Lorraine Hansberry became the first African-American woman to have a play on Broadway, and A Raisin in the Sun was that play. Seeing as this was in the 1950s, I imagine that a more traditional style of writing would have felt less foreign to mainstream American society, and as such, her choice to write this play in a style that may have felt more comfortable to many people could have been helpful to her in breaking down a lot of these barriers and really becoming this pioneer in African American equality, in gender equality. For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide was debuted on Broadway in 1975, I believe, so about 16 years after A Raisin in the Sun. And I do believe that the style in For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide really allows it to be much more of an immersive experience. It allows for this sort of rhythm, this percussive feel. It allows for choreography and dance, which would not have been as possible in a play like A Raisin in the Sun. So Hansberry arguably made a very smart decision in writing her play in the way that she did, and writing it in this sort of linear storytelling style, which might have connected more with a mainstream audience at the time that it debuted. And Shang, too, arguably made a very smart and also very creative and artistic choice in writing her play in the way that she did, using almost entirely African-American vernacular, using forward slashes instead of periods. All of these things that really set her work apart from that traditional literary style and allow her to send a more unique message and create a more immersive experience. And via both of these plays, we as readers or as viewers of them are able to learn a lot about racial identity in the U.S., specifically that of African Americans in this case. Both plays really drive home this message of the importance of becoming more anti-racist in our own philosophies, in our own ways of thinking. Both plays effectively communicate the stories and the voices of African Americans. And just to finish out the video, I wanted to read one of the first lines from For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide. And this is the opening monologue to the play, which is given by the character who's called Lady in Brown. And it says, "I can't hear anything but maddening screams and the soft strains of death, and you promised me. Somebody, anybody, sing a black girl's song. Bring her out, to know herself, to know you, but to sing but sing her rhythms. Caring, struggle, hard times, sing her song of life. She's been dead so long, closed in silence so long, she doesn't know the sound of her own voice, her infinite beauty. I think that these lines are so powerful, and I think they really kind of tie back to this idea of sharing the experiences of African American women, sharing the experiences of minority groups, which is really a theme that both of these plays effectively do. They put us in the shoes of someone else, and they help us to better understand the trials and the struggles that certain minority individuals are still facing in our country today. So on that note, both of these plays I find to be extremely powerful and to share a lot in common as far as theme, regardless of their different styles and different syntax. They both really align in this message of combating racism, sexism, and oppression in the United States.